Jailbird by Kurt Vonnegut, Part 5, Chapters 19 through 23, and Epilogue, read by Ron Gabaldon. 19. Vanzetti, for good measure, was also charged with an attempted payroll robbery in Bridgewater, Massachusetts. He was tried and convicted. Thus was he transmogrified from a fish peddler into a known criminal before he and Sacco were tried for murder. Was Vanzetti guilty of this lesser crime? Possibly so, but it did not matter much. Who said it did not matter much? The judge who tried the case said it did not matter much. He was Webster Thayer, a graduate of Dartmouth College and a descendant of many fine New England families. He told the jury, "This man, although he may not have actually committed the crime attributed to him, is nevertheless morally culpable, because he is the enemy of our existing institutions." Word of honor. This was said by a judge in an American court of law. I take the quotation from a book at hand, Labor's Untold Story by Richard O'Boyer and Herbert M. Moray, United Front, San Francisco, 1955. And then, this same Judge Thayer got to try Sacco and the known criminal Vanzetti for murder. They were found guilty about 1 year after their arrest, in July of 1921, when I was 8 years old. They were finally electrocuted when I was 15. If I heard anybody in Cleveland say anything about it, I have forgotten now. I talked to a messenger boy in an elevator in the RAMJAC building the other morning. He was about my age. I asked him if he remembered anything about the execution when he was a boy. He said that, yes, he had heard his father say he was sick and tired of people talking about Sacco and Vanzetti all the time, and that he was glad it was finally over with. I asked him what line of work his father had been in. "He was a bank president in Montpelier, Vermont," he said. This was an old man in a war-surplus United States Army overcoat. Al Capone, the famous Chicago gangster, thought Sacco and Vanzetti should have been executed. He, too, believed that they were enemies of the American way of thinking about America. He was offended by how ungrateful to America these fellow Italian immigrants were. According to Labor's Untold Story, Capone said, "Bolshevism is knocking at our gates. We must keep the worker away from red literature and red ruses." Which reminds me of a story written by Dr. Robert Fender, my friend back in prison. The story was about a planet where the worst crime was ingratitude. People were executed all the time for being ungrateful. They were executed the way people used to be executed in Czechoslovakia. They were defenestrated. They were thrown out of altitudinous windows. The hero in Fender's story was finally thrown out of a window for ingratitude. His last words as he went sailing out of a window 30 floors up were these: "Thanks a million." Before Sacco and Vanzetti could be executed for ingratitude in the Massachusetts style, however, huge crowds turned out in protest all over the world. The fish peddler and the shoemaker had become planetary celebrities. "Never in our full life," said Vanzetti, "could we hope to do such work for tolerance, for justice, for man's understanding of man, as now we do by accident." If this were done as a modern passion play, the actors playing the authorities, the Pontius Pilates, would still have to express scorn for the opinions of the mob, but they would be in favor rather than against the death penalty this time. And they would never wash their hands. They were, in fact, so proud of what they were about to do that they asked a committee composed of 3 of the wisest, most respected, most fair-minded and impartial men within the boundaries of the state to say to the world whether or not justice was about to be done. It was only this part of the Sacco and Vanzetti story that Kenneth Whistler chose to tell, that night so long ago when Mary Kathleen and I held hands while he spoke. He dwelt most scornfully on the resident credentials of the 3 wise men. One was Robert Grant, a retired probate judge, who knew what the laws were and how they were meant to work. The chairman was the president of Harvard, and he would still be president when I became a freshman. Imagine that. He was A. Lawrence Lowell. The other, who according to Whistler, knew a lot about electricity if nothing else, was Samuel W. Stratton, the president of the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. During their deliberations, they received thousands of telegrams, some in favor of the executions, but most opposed. Among the telegraphers were Romain Rolland, George Bernard Shaw, Albert Einstein, John Galsworthy, Sinclair Lewis, and H.G. Wells. The triumvirate declared at last that it was clear to them that if Sacco and Vanzetti were electrocuted, justice would be done. So much for the wisdom of even the wisest human beings. And I am now compelled to wonder if wisdom has ever existed or can ever exist. Might wisdom be as impossible in this particular universe as a perpetual motion machine? Who was the wisest man in the Bible, supposedly? Wiser even, we can suppose, than the president of Harvard. He was King Solomon, of course. 2 women claiming the same baby appeared before Solomon, asking him to apply his legendary wisdom to their case. He suggested cutting the baby in 2. And the wisest men in Massachusetts said that Sacco and Vanzetti should die. When the decision was rendered, my hero Kenneth Whistler was in charge of pickets before the Massachusetts State House in Boston. By his own account, it was raining. Nature sympathized, he said, looking straight at Mary Kathleen and me in the front row. He laughed. Mary Kathleen and I did not laugh with him. Neither did anybody else in the audience. His laugh was a chilling laugh about how little nature ever cares about what human beings think is going on. And Whistler kept his pickets before the State House for 10 more days, until the night of the execution. Then he led them through the winding streets and across the bridge to Charlestown, where the prison was. Among his pickets were Edna St. Vincent Millay and John Dos Passos and Haywood Brown. National Guardsmen and police were waiting for them. There were machine gunners on the walls, and their guns aimed out at the general populace, the people who wanted Pontius Pilate to be merciful. And Kenneth Whistler had with him a heavy parcel. It was an enormous banner, long and narrow and rolled up tight. He had made it that morning. The prison lights began their dimming. When they had dimmed 9 times, Whistler and a friend hurried to the funeral parlor where the bodies of Sacco and Vanzetti were to be displayed. The state had no further use for the bodies. They had become the property of relatives and friends again. Whistler told us that 2 pair of sawhorses had been set up in the front room of the funeral parlor, awaiting the coffins. Now Whistler and his friend unfurled their banner, and they nailed it to the wall over the sawhorses. On the banner were painted the words that the man who had sentenced Sacco and Vanzetti to death, Webster Thayer, had spoken to a friend soon after he passed the sentence. "Did you see what I did to those anarchist bastards the other day?" 20. Sacco and Vanzetti never lost their dignity, never cracked up. Walter F. Starbuck finally did. I seemed to hold up quite well when I was arrested in the showroom of the American Harp Company. When old Delmar Peel showed the 2 policemen the circular about the stolen clarinet parts when he explained what I was to be arrested for, I even smiled. I had the perfect alibi, after all. I had been in prison for the past 2 years. When I told them that, though, it did not relax them as much as I had hoped. They decided that I was perhaps more of a desperado than they had first supposed. The police station was in an uproar when we arrived. Television crews and newspaper reporters were trying to get at the young men who had rioted in the gardens of the United Nations, who had thrown the finance minister of Sri Lanka into the East River. The Sri Lankan had not been found yet, so it was assumed that the rioters would be charged with murder. Actually, the Sri Lankan would be rescued by a police launch about 2 hours later. He would be found clinging to a bellboy off Governor's Island. The papers the next morning would describe him as incoherent. I can believe it. There was no one to question me at once. I was going to have to be locked up for a while. The police station was so busy that there wasn't even an ordinary cell for me. I was given a chair in the corridor outside the cells. It was there that the rioters insulted me from behind bars, imagining that I would enjoy nothing so much as making love to them. I was eventually taken to a padded cell in the basement. It was designed to hold a maniac until an ambulance could come for her or him. There wasn't a toilet in there because a maniac might try to bash his or her brains out on a toilet's rim. There was no cot, no chair. I would have to sit or lie on the padded floor. Oddly enough, the only piece of furniture was a large bowling trophy, which somebody had stored in there. I got to know it well. So there I was, back in a quiet basement again. And, as had happened to me when I was the president's special advisor on youth affairs, I was forgotten again. I was accidentally left there from noon until 8 o'clock that night, without food or water or a toilet or the slightest sound from the outside, on what was to have been my first full day of freedom. Thus began a test of my character that I failed. I thought about Mary Kathleen and all she had been through. I still did not know that she was Mrs. Jack Graham, but she had told me something else very interesting about herself. After I left Harvard, after I stopped answering her letters or even thinking much about her anymore, she hitchhiked to Kentucky, where Kenneth Whistler was still working as a miner and an organizer. She arrived at sundown at the shack where he was living alone. The place was unlocked, having nothing inside worth stealing. Whistler was still at work. Mary Kathleen had brought food with her. When Whistler came home, there was smoke coming out of his chimney. There was a hot meal waiting for him inside. That was how she got down into the coal fields. And that was how she happened, when Kenneth Whistler became violent late at night because of alcohol, to run out into the moonlit street of a shanty town and into the arms of a young mining engineer. He was, of course, Jack Graham. And then I regaled myself with a story by my prison friend, Dr. Robert Fender, which he had published under the name of Kilgore Trout. It was called Asleep at the Switch. It was about a huge reception center outside the pearly gates of heaven, filled with computers and staffed by people who had been certified public accountants or investment counselors or business managers back on Earth. You could not get into heaven until you had submitted to a full review of how well you had handled the business opportunities God, through his angels, had offered to you on Earth. All day long, and in every cubicle, you could hear the experts saying with utmost weariness to people who had missed this opportunity and then that one, and there you were, asleep at the switch again. How much time had I spent in solitary by then? I will make a guess. 5 minutes. Asleep at the Switch was quite a sacrilegious story. The hero was the ghost of Albert Einstein. He himself was so little interested in wealth that he scarcely heard what his auditor had to say to him. It was some sort of balderdash about how he could have become a billionaire if only he had gotten a second mortgage on his house in Bern, Switzerland in 1905 and invested the money in known uranium deposits before telling the world that E=mc². But there you were, asleep at the switch again, said the auditor. Yes, said Einstein politely. It does seem rather typical. So you see, said the auditor, life really has been quite fair. You did have a remarkable number of opportunities, whether you took them or not. Yes, I see that now, said Einstein. Would you mind saying that in so many words, said the auditor. Saying what? Said Einstein. That life was fair. Life was fair, said Einstein. If you don't really mean it, said the auditor, I have many more examples to show you. For instance, just forgetting atomic energy, if you had simply taken the money you put into a savings bank when you were at the Institute for Advanced Studies at Princeton, and you had put it, starting in 1950, say, into IBM and Polaroid and Xerox, even though you had only 5 more years to live. The auditor raised his eyes suggestively, inviting Einstein to show how smart he could be. I would have been rich, said Einstein. Comfortable, shall we say, said the auditor smugly. But there you were again, and again his eyebrows went up. Asleep at the switch? Asked Einstein hopefully. The auditor stood and extended his hand, which Einstein accepted unenthusiastically. So you see, Dr. Einstein, he said, We can't blame God for everything, now can we? He handed Einstein his pass through the pearly gates. Good to have you aboard, he said. So, into heaven Einstein went, carrying his beloved fiddle. He thought no more about the audit. He was a veteran of countless border crossings by then. There had always been senseless questions to answer, empty promises to make, meaningless documents to sign. But once inside heaven, Einstein encountered ghost after ghost who was sick about what his or her audit had shown. One husband and wife team, which had committed suicide after losing everything at a chicken farm in New Hampshire, had been told that they had been living the whole time over the largest deposit of nickel in the world. A 14-year-old Harlem child who had been killed in a gang fight was told about a 2-carat diamond ring that lay for weeks at the bottom of a catch basin he passed every day. It was flawless and had not been reported as stolen. If he had sold it for only a tenth of its value, $400, say, according to his auditor, and speculated in commodities futures, especially in cocoa at that time, he could have moved his mother and sisters and himself into a Park Avenue condominium and sent himself to Andover and then to Harvard after that. There was Harvard again. All the auditing stories that Einstein heard were told by Americans. He had chosen to settle in the American part of heaven. Understandably, he had mixed feelings about Europeans since he was a Jew. But it wasn't only Americans who were being audited. Pakistanis and pygmies from the Philippines and even communists had to go through the very same thing. It was in character for Einstein to be offended first by the mathematics of the system the auditors wanted everybody to be so grateful for. He calculated that if every person on Earth took full advantage of every opportunity, became a millionaire and then a billionaire and so on, the paper wealth on that one little planet would exceed the worth of all the minerals in the universe in a matter of 3 months or so. Also, there would be nobody left to do any useful work. So he sent God a note. It assumed that God had no idea what sorts of rubbish his auditors were talking. It accused the auditors rather than God of cruelly deceiving new arrivals about the opportunities they had had on Earth. He tried to guess the auditors' motives. He wondered if they might not be sadists. The story ended abruptly. Einstein did not get to see God, but God sent out an archangel who was boiling mad. He told Einstein that if he continued to destroy Ghost's respect for the audits, he was going to take Einstein's fiddle away from him for all eternity. So Einstein never discussed the audits with anybody ever again. His fiddle meant more to him than anything. The story was certainly a slam at God, suggesting that he was capable of a cheap subterfuge like the audits to get out of being blamed for how hard economic life was down here. I made my mind a blank, but then it started singing about Sally in the garden again. Mary Kathleen O'Looney, exercising her cosmic powers as Mrs. Jack Graham, had meanwhile telephoned Arpad Lean, the top man at RAMJAC. She ordered him to find out what the police had done with me, and to send the toughest lawyer in New York City to rescue me, no matter what the cost. He was to make me a RAMJAC vice president after that. While she was at it, she said, she had a list of other good people who were to be rounded up and also made vice presidents. These were the people I had told her about, of course. The strangers who had been so nice to me. She also ordered him to tell Doris Cram, the old secretary at the American Harp Company, that she didn't have to retire, no matter how old she was. Yes, and there in my padded cell I told myself a joke I had read in the Harvard Lampoon when I was a freshman. It had amazed me back then because it seemed so dirty. When I became the president's special advisor on youth affairs and had to read college humor again, I discovered that the joke was still being published many times a year, unchanged. This was it. She. How dare you kiss me like that? He. I was just trying to find out who ate all the macaroons. So I had a good laugh about that there in solitary, but then I began to crack. I could not stop saying to myself, macaroons. 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 Things got much worse after that. I sobbed. I bounced myself off the walls. I took a crap in a corner. I dropped the bowling trophy on top of the crap. I screamed a poem I had learned in grammar school. Don't care if I do die, do die, do die. Like to make the juice fly, juice fly, juice fly. I may have even masturbated. Why not? We old folks have much richer sex lives than most young people imagine. I eventually collapsed. At 7 o'clock that night, the toughest attorney in New York entered the police station upstairs. He had traced me that far. He was a famous man, known to be extremely ferocious and humorless in prosecuting or defending almost anyone. The police were thunderstruck when such a dreaded celebrity appeared. He demanded to know what had become of me. Nobody knew. There was no record anywhere of my having been released or transferred elsewhere. My lawyer knew I hadn't gone home because he had already asked after me there. Mary Kathleen had told Arpad Lean, and Lean had told the lawyer that I lived at the Arapahoe. They could not even find out what I had been arrested for. So all of the cells were checked. I wasn't in any of them, of course. The people who had brought me in and the man who had locked me up had all gone off duty. None of them could be reached at home. But then the detective who was trying to placate my lawyer remembered the cell downstairs and decided to have a look inside it, just in case. When the key turned in the lock, I was lying on my stomach like a dog in a kennel, facing the door. My stocking feet extended in the direction of the bowling trophy and the crap. I had removed my shoes for some reason. When the detective opened the door, he was appalled to see me, realizing how long I had been in there. The city of New York had accidentally committed a very serious crime against me. "Mr. Starbuck?" he asked anxiously. I said nothing. I did sit up. I no longer cared where I was or what might happen next. I was like a hooked fish that had done all the fighting it could. Whatever was on the other end of the line was welcome to reel me in. When the detective said, "Your lawyer is here," I did not protest even inwardly that nobody knew I was in jail, that I had no lawyer, no friends, no anything. So be it. My lawyer was there. Now the lawyer showed himself. It would not have surprised me if he had been a unicorn. He was, in fact, almost that fantastic. A man who, when only 26 years old, had been chief counsel of the Senate Permanent Investigating Committee, whose chairman was Senator Joseph R. McCarthy, the most spectacular hunter of disloyal Americans since World War II. He was in his late 40s now, but still unsmiling and nervously shrewd. During the McCarthy era, which came after Leland Clues and I made such fools of ourselves, I had hated and feared this man. He was on my side now. "Mr. Starbuck," he said, "I am here to represent you, if you want me to. I have been retained on your behalf by the RAMJAC Corporation. Roy M. Cohn is my name." What a miracle worker he was. I was out of the police station and into a waiting limousine before you could say, "Habeas corpus." Cohn, having delivered me to the limousine, did not himself get in. He wished me well by shaking my hand and was gone. He never touched me, never gave any indication that he knew that I, too, had played a very public part in American history in olden times. So there I was in a limousine again. Why not? Anything was possible in a dream. Hadn't Roy M. Cohn just gotten me out of jail? And hadn't I left my shoes behind? So why shouldn't the dream go on, and have Leland Clues and Israel Edel, the night clerk at the Arapahoe, already sitting in the back of the limousine, with a space between them for me? This it did. They nodded to me uneasily. They, too, felt that life wasn't making good sense just now. What was going on, of course, was that the limousine was cruising around Manhattan like a school bus, picking up people Mary Kathleen O'Looney had told Arpad Lean to hire as RAMJAC vice presidents. This was Lean's personal limousine. It was what I have since learned is called a stretch limousine. The American Harp Company could have used the back seat for a showroom. Clues and Edel and the next person we were going to pick up had all been telephoned personally by Lean, after some of his assistants had found out more about who they were and where they were. Leland Clues had been found in the phone book. Edel had been found behind the desk at the Arapahoe. One of the assistants had gone to the coffee shop of the Royalton to ask for the name of a person who worked there and had a French fried hand. Other calls had gone to Georgia, one to the RAMJAC regional office, asking if they had a chauffeur named Cleveland Laws working for them, and another to the Federal Minimum Security Adult Correction Facility at Finletter Air Force Base, asking if they had a guard named Clyde Carter and a prisoner named Dr. Robert Fender there. Clues asked me if I understood what was going on. No, I said. This is just the dream of a jailbird. It's not supposed to make sense. Clues asked me what had happened to my shoes. I left them in the padded cell, I said. You were in a padded cell, he said. It's very nice, I said. You can't possibly hurt yourself. A man in the front seat next to the chauffeur now turned his face to us. I knew him too. He had been one of the lawyers who had escorted Virgil Greathouse into prison on the morning before. He was Arpad Lean's lawyer too. He was worried about my having lost my shoes. He said we would go back to the police station and get them. Not on your life, I said. They found out by now that I threw the bowling trophy down in the shit, and they'll just arrest me again. Edel and Clues now drew away from me some. This has to be a dream, said Clues. Be my guest, I said. The more the merrier. Gentlemen, said the lawyer genially. Please, you mustn't worry so. You are about to be offered the opportunity of your lives. When the hell did she see me? Said Edel. What was the wonderful thing she saw me do? We may never know, said the lawyer. She seldom explains herself, and she's a mistress of disguise. She could be anybody. Maybe she was that big black pimp that came in after you last night, Edel said to me. I was nice to him. He was 8 feet tall. I missed him, I said. You're lucky, said Edel. You two know each other, said Clues. Since childhood, I said. I was going to blow this dream wide open by absolutely refusing to take it seriously. I was damn well going to get back to my bed at the Arapahoe or my cot in prison. I didn't care which. Maybe I could even wake up in the bedroom of my little brick bungalow in Chevy Chase, Maryland, and my wife would still be alive. I can promise you she wasn't the tall pimp, said the lawyer. That much we can be sure of. Whatever she looks like, she is not tall. Who isn't tall? I said. Mrs. Jack Graham, said the lawyer. Sorry I asked, I said. You must have done her some sort of favor too, the lawyer said to me, or done something she saw and admired. It's my Boy Scout training, I said. So we came to a stop in front of a rundown apartment building on the Upper West Side. Out came Frank Ubriaco, the owner of the coffee shop. He was dressed for the dream in a pale blue velvet suit and green and white cowboy boots with high heels. His French fried hand was sheathed elegantly in a white kid glove. Clues pulled down a jump seat for him. I said hello to him. Who are you? He said. You served me breakfast this morning, I said. I served everybody breakfast this morning, he said. You know him too? Said Clues. This is my town, I said. I addressed the lawyer, more convinced than ever that this was a dream, and I told him, All right, let's pick up my mother next. He echoed me uncertainly. Your mother? Sure, why not? Everybody else is here, I said. He wanted to be cooperative. Mr. Lean didn't say anything specific about your not bringing anybody else along. You'd like to bring your mother? Very much, I said. Where is she? He said. In a cemetery in Cleveland, I said. But that shouldn't slow you down. He thereafter avoided direct conversations with me. When we got underway again, Ubriaco asked those of us in the back seat who we were. Clues and Edel introduced themselves. I declined to do so. They're all people who caught the eye of Mrs. Graham, just as you did, said the lawyer. You guys know her? Ubriaco asked Clues and Edel and me. We all shrugged. Jesus Christ, said Ubriaco. This better be a pretty good job you got to offer. I like what I do. You'll see, said the lawyer. I broke a date for you monkeys, said Ubriaco. Yes, and Mr. Lean broke a date for you, said the lawyer. His daughter is having her debut at the Waldorf tonight, and he won't be there. He'll be talking to you gentlemen instead. Fucking crazy, said Ubriaco. Nobody else had anything to say. As we crossed Central Park to the east side, Ubriaco spoke again. Fucking debut, he said. Clues said to me, "You're the only one who knows everybody else in here. You're in the middle of this thing somehow." "Why wouldn't I be?" I said. "It's my dream." And we were delivered without further conversation to the penthouse dwelling of Arpad Lean. We were told by the lawyer to leave our shoes in the foyer. It was the custom of the house. I, of course, was already in my stocking feet. Ubriaco asked if Lean was a Japanese, since the Japanese commonly took off their shoes indoors. The lawyer assured him that Lean was a Caucasian, but that he had grown up in Fiji, where his parents ran a general store. As I would find out later, Lean's father was a Hungarian Jew, and his mother was a Greek Cypriot. His parents met when they were working on a Swedish cruise ship in the late 20s. They jumped ship in Fiji and started the store. Lean himself looked like an idealized Plains Indian to me. He could have been a movie star, and he came out into the foyer in a striped silk dressing gown and black socks and garters. He still hoped to make his daughter's debut. Before he introduced himself to us, he had to tell the lawyer an incredible piece of news. "You know what the son of a bitch is in prison for?" he said. "Treason! And we're supposed to get him out and give him a job. Treason! How do you get somebody out of jail who's committed treason? How do we even give him a lousy job without every patriot in the country raising hell?" The lawyer didn't know. "Well," said Lean, "what the hell? Get me Roy Cohn again. I wish I were back in Nashville." This last remark alluded to Lean's having been the leading publisher of country music in Nashville, Tennessee, before his little empire was swallowed up by RAMJAC. His old company, in fact, was the nucleus of the down-home records division of RAMJAC. Now he looked us over, and he shook his head in wonderment. We were a freakish crew. "Gentlemen," he said, "you have all been noticed by Mrs. Jack Graham. She didn't tell me where or when. She said you were honest and kind." "Not me," said Ubriaco. "You're free to question her judgment if you want," said Lean. "I'm not. I have to offer you good jobs. I don't mind doing that, though, and I'll tell you why. She never told me to do anything that didn't turn out to be in the best interests of the company. I used to say that I never wanted to work for anybody, but working for Mrs. Jack Graham has been the greatest privilege of my life." He meant it. He did not mind making us all vice presidents. The company had 700 vice presidents of this and that on the top level, the corporate level alone. When you got out into the subsidiaries, of course, the whole business of presidents and vice presidents started all over again. "You know what she looks like?" Ubriaco wanted to know. "I haven't seen her recently," said Lean. This was an urbane lie. He had never seen her, which was a matter of public record. He would confess to me later that he did not even know how he had come to Mrs. Graham's attention. He thought she might have seen an article on him in the Diners Club magazine, which had featured him in their Man on the Move department. In any event, he was abjectly loyal to her. He loved and feared his idea of Mrs. Graham, the way M.L. Larkin loved and feared his idea of Jesus Christ. He was luckier than Larkin in his worship, of course, since the invisible superior being over him called him up and wrote him letters and told him what to do. He actually said one time, "Working for Mrs. Graham has been a religious experience for me." I was adrift. No matter how much money I was making, my life had no purpose until I became president of RAMJAC and placed myself at her beck and call. All happiness is religious, I have to think sometimes. Lean said he would talk to us one by one in his library. "Mrs. Graham didn't tell me about your backgrounds, what your special interests might be, so you're just going to have to tell me about yourselves." He said for Ubriaco to come into the library first, and asked the rest of us to wait in the living room. "Is there anything my butler can bring you to drink?" he said. Clues didn't want anything. Edel asked for a beer. I, still hoping to blow the dream wide open, ordered a Poussey Café, a rainbow-colored drink that I had never seen, but which I had studied while earning my Doctor of Mixology degree. A heavy liqueur was put into the bottom of the glass, then a lighter one of a different color was carefully spooned in on top of that, and then a lighter one still on top of that, and on, with each bright layer undisturbed by the one above or below. Lean was impressed with my order. He repeated it to make sure he had heard it right. "If it's not too much trouble," I said. It was no more trouble, surely, than building a full-rigged ship model in a bottle, say. "No problem," said Lean. This, I would learn, was a favorite expression of his. He told his butler to give me a poussé café without further ado. He and Ubriaco went into the library, and the rest of us entered the living room, which had a swimming pool. I had never seen a living room with a swimming pool before. I had heard of such a thing, of course, but hearing of and actually seeing that much water in a living room are two very different things. I knelt by the pool and swirled my hand in the water, curious about the temperature, which was soupy. When I withdrew my hand and considered its wetness, I had to admit to myself that the wet was undreamlike. My hand was really wet, and would remain so for some time unless I did something about it. All this was really going on. As I stood, the butler arrived with my poussé café. Outrageous behavior was not the answer. I was going to have to start paying attention again. "Thank you," I said to the butler. "You're welcome, sir," he replied. Clues and Edel were seated at one end of a couch about half a block long. I joined them, wanting their appreciation for how sedate I had become. They were continuing to speculate as to when Mrs. Graham might have caught them behaving so virtuously. Clues mourned that he had not had many opportunities to be virtuous, selling advertising matchbooks and calendars from door to door. "About the best I can do is let a building custodian tell me his war stories," he said. He remembered a custodian in the Flatiron Building who claimed to have been the first American to cross the bridge over the Rhine at RAMJAC, Germany during World War II. The capture of this bridge had been an immense event, allowing the Allied armies to pour at high speed. "I sometimes think that the custodian could have been Mrs. Jack Graham, though," Clues said. Israel Edel supposed that Mrs. Graham could be disguised as a man. "I sometimes think that about half our customers at the Arapaho are transvestites," he said. The possibility of Mrs. Graham's being a transvestite would be brought up again soon, and most startlingly by Arpad Lean. Meanwhile, though, Clues got back on the subject of World War II. He got personal about it. He said that he and I, when we were wartime bureaucrats, had only imagined that we had something to do with defeats and victories. The war was won by fighters, Walter. All the rest was dreams. It was his opinion that all the memoirs written about that war by civilians were swindles, pretenses that the war had been won by talkers and writers and socialites, when it could only have been won by fighters. A telephone rang in the foyer. The butler came in to say that the call was for Clues, who could take it on the telephone on the coffee table in front of us. The telephone was black and white plastic and shaped like Snoopy, the famous dog in the comic strip called Peanuts. Peanuts was owned by what was about to become my division of RAMJAC. To converse on that phone, as I would soon discover, you had to put your mouth over the dog's stomach and stick his nose in your ear. Why not? It was Clues' wife Sarah, my old girlfriend, calling from their apartment. She had just come home from a private nursing case, had found his note, which said where he was and what he was doing there and how he could be reached by telephone. He told her that I was there too, and she could not believe it. She asked to talk to me, so Clues handed me the plastic dog. "Hi," I said. "This is crazy," she said. "What are you doing there?" "Drinking a poussé café by the swimming pool," I said. "I can't imagine you drinking a poussé café," she said. "Well, I am," I said. She asked how Clues and I had met. I told her. "Such a small world, Walter," she said, and so on. She asked me if Clues had told me that I had done them a big favor when I testified against him. I would have to say that that opinion is moot, I told her. "Is what?" she said. "Moot," I said. It was a word she had somehow never heard before. I explained it to her. "I'm so dumb," she said. "There's so much I don't know, Walter." She sounded just like the same old Sarah on the telephone. It could have been 1935 again, which made what she said next especially poignant. "Oh my God, Walter, we're both over 60 years old. How is that possible?" "You'd be surprised, Sarah," I said. "She asked me to come home with clues for supper, and I said I would if I could, that I didn't know what was going to happen next. I asked her where she lived. It turned out that she and Clues lived in the basement of the same building where her grandmother used to live, in Tudor City. She asked me if I remembered her grandmother's apartment, all the old servants and furniture jammed into only 4 rooms. I said I did, and we laughed. I did not tell her that my son also lived somewhere in Tudor City. I would find out that there was nothing vague about his proximity to her, with his musical wife and his adopted children. Stankiewicz of the New York Times was in the same building, and notoriously so, because of the wildness of the children, and only 3 floors above Leland and Sarah Clues. She said that it was good that we could still laugh, despite all we had been through. At least we still have our sense of humor, she said. That was something Julie Nixon had said about her father after he got bounced out of the White House. He still has his sense of humor. Yes, at least that, I agreed. Waiter, she said, what's this fly doing in my soup? What? I said. What's this fly doing in my soup? She persisted. Then it came back to me. This was the opening line in a daisy chain of jokes we used to tell each other on the telephone. I closed my eyes. I gave the answering line, and the telephone became a time machine for me. It allowed me to escape from 1977 and into the 4th dimension. I believe that's the backstroke, madam, I said. Waiter, she said, there's also a needle in my soup. I'm sorry, madam, I said. That's a typographical error. That should have been a noodle. Why do you charge so much for cream? She said. It's because the cows hate to squat on those little bottles, I said. I keep thinking it's Tuesday, she said. It is Tuesday, I said. That's what I keep thinking, she said. Tell me, do you serve flannel cakes? Not on the menu today, I said. Last night I dreamed I was eating flannel cakes, she said. That must have been very nice, I said. It was terrible, she said. When I woke up, the blanket was gone. She too had reason to escape into the 4th dimension. As I would find out later, her patient had died that night. Sarah had liked her a lot. The patient was only 36, but she had a congenitally defective heart, huge and fatty and weak. And imagine, if you will, the effect this conversation was having on Leland Clues, who was sitting right next to me. My eyes were closed, as I say, and I was in such an ecstasy of timelessness and placelessness that I might as well have been having sexual intercourse with his wife before his eyes. He forgave me, of course. He forgives everybody for everything. But he still had to be impressed by how lazily in love Sarah and I could be on the telephone. What is more protean than adultery? Nothing in this world. I am thinking of going on a diet, Sarah said. I know how you can lose 20 pounds of ugly fat right away, I said. How? She said. Have your head cut off, I said. Clues could hear only half of my conversation, of course, so he could only hear the premise or the snapper of a joke, but never both. Some of the lines were highly suggestive. I asked Sarah, I remember, if she smoked after intercourse. Clues never heard her reply, which was this: I don't know. I've never looked. And then she went on. What did you do before you were a waiter? I used to clean bird shit out of cuckoo clocks, I said. I have often wondered what the white stuff in bird shit was, she said. That's bird shit too, I told her. What kind of work do you do? I work in a bloomer factory, she said. Is it a good job in the bloomer factory? I inquired archly. 21. Oh, she said, I can't complain. I pull down about 10,000 a year. Sarah coughed, and that too was a cue which I nearly missed. That's quite a cough you have there, I said in the nick of time. It won't stop, she said. Take 2 of these pills, I said. They're just the thing. So she made some swallowing sounds. Gluck, gluck, gluck. And then she asked what was in the pills. The most powerful laxative known to medical science, I said. Laxative, she said. Yes, I said. Now you don't dare cough. We did the joke, too, about a sick horse I supposedly had. I had never really owned a horse. The veterinarian gave me half a pound of purple powder that I was to give the horse, supposedly. The veterinarian told me to make a tube out of paper and to put the powder inside the tube, and then to slip the tube into the horse's mouth and to blow it down its throat. "How is the horse?" said Sarah. "Oh, the horse is fine," I said. "You don't look so good," she said. "No," I said. "That is because the horse blew first." "Can you still imitate your mother's laugh?" she said. This was not the premise of yet another joke. Sarah genuinely wanted to hear me imitate my mother's laugh, something I used to do a lot for Sarah on the telephone. I had not tried the trick in years. I not only had to make my voice high, I also had to make it beautiful. The thing was this: Mother never laughed out loud. She had been trained to stifle her laughter when a servant girl in Lithuania. The idea was that a master or guest, hearing a servant laughing somewhere in the house, might suspect that the servant was laughing about him. So when my mother could not help laughing, she made tiny, pure sounds like a music box, or perhaps like bells far away. It was accidental that they were so beautiful. So, forgetful of where I was, I now filled my lungs and tightened my throat, and to please my old girlfriend, I reincarnated the laughing part of my mother. It was at that point that Arpad Lean and Frank Ubriaco had come back into the living room. They heard the end of my song. I told Sarah that I had to hang up now, and I did hang up. Arpad Lean stared at me hard. I had heard women speak of men's undressing them mentally. Now I was finding out what that felt like. As things turned out, that was exactly what Lean was doing to me, imagining what I would look like with no clothes on. He was beginning to suspect that I was Mrs. Jack Graham, checking up on him while disguised as a man. 22. I could not know that, of course, that he thought I might be Mrs. Graham, so his subsequent courting of me was as inexplicable as anything that had happened to me all day. I tried to believe that he was being so attentive in order to soften the bad news he had to give me by and by, that I was simply not RAMJAC material, and that his limousine was waiting down below to take me back, still jobless, to the Arapahoe. But the messages in his eyes were more passionate than that. He was ravenous for my approval of everything he did. He told me, and not Leland Clues or Israel Edel, that he had just made Frank Ubriaco a vice president in the McDonald's hamburger division of RAMJAC. I nodded that I thought that was nice. The nod was not enough for Lean. "I think it's a wonderful example of putting the right man in the right job," he said. "Don't you? That's what RAMJAC is all about, don't you think? Putting good people where they can use their talents to the fullest?" The question was for me and nobody else, so I finally said, "Yes." I had to go through the same thing after he interviewed and hired Clues and Edel. Clues was made a vice president of the Diamond Match division, presumably because he had been selling advertising matchbooks for so long. Edel was made a vice president of the Hilton department of the Hospitality Associates Limited division, presumably because of his 3 weeks of experience as a night clerk at the Arapahoe. It was then my turn to go into the library with him. "Last, but not least," he said coyly. After he closed the door on the rest of the house, his flirtatiousness became even more outrageous. "Come into my parlor," he murmured, said the spider to the fly. He winked at me broadly. I hated this. I wondered what had happened to the others in here. There was a Mussolini-style desk with a swivel chair behind it. "Perhaps you should sit there," he said. He made his eyebrows go up and down. "Doesn't that look like your kind of chair? Eh? Eh? Your kind of chair?" This could only be mockery, I thought. I responded to it humbly. I had had no self-respect for years and years. "Sir," I said, "I don't know what's going on." "Ah," he said, holding up a finger. "That does happen sometimes." "I don't know how you found me, or even if I'm who you think I am," I said. I haven't yet told you who I think you are, he said. Walter F. Starbuck, I said bleakly. If you say so, he said. Well, I said, whoever I am, I'm not much anymore. If you're really offering jobs, all I want is a little one. I'm under orders to make you a vice president, he said. Orders from a person I respect very much. I intend to obey. I want to be a bartender, I said. Ah, he said, and mix poussé cafés. I can if I have to, I said. I have a Doctor of Mixology degree. You also have a lovely high voice when you want to, he said. I think I had better go home now, I said. I can walk. It isn't far from here. It was only about 40 blocks. I had no shoes, but who needed shoes? I would get home somehow without them. When it's time to go home, he said, you shall have my limousine. It's time to go home now, I said. I don't care how I get there. It has been a very tiring day for me. I don't feel very clever. I just want to sleep. If you know anybody who needs a bartender, even part-time, I can be found at the Arapahoe. What an actor you are, he said. I hung my head. I didn't even want to look at him or at anybody anymore. Not at all, I said. Never was. I will tell you something strange, he said. I won't understand it, I said. Everyone here tonight remembers having seen you, but they've never seen each other before, he said. How would you explain that? I have no job, I said. I just got out of prison. I've been walking around town with nothing to do. Such a complicated story, he said. You were in prison, you say? It happens, I said. I won't ask what you were in prison for, he said. What he meant, of course, was that I, and Mrs. Graham disguised as a man, did not have to go on telling taller and taller lies, unless it entertained me to do so. Watergate, I said. Watergate, he exclaimed. I thought I knew the names of almost all the Watergate people. As I found out later, he not only knew their names, he knew many of them well enough to have bribed them with illegal campaign contributions, and to have chipped in for their defenses afterward. Why is it that I have never heard the name Starbuck associated with Watergate before? I don't know, I said, my head still down. It was like being in a wonderful musical comedy where the critics mentioned everybody but me. If you can find an old program, I'll show you my name. The prison was in Georgia, I take it, he said. Yes, I said. I supposed that he knew that because Roy M. Cohn had looked up my record when he had to get me out of jail. That explains Georgia, he said. I couldn't imagine why anybody would want Georgia explained. So that's how you know Clyde Carter, and Cleveland Laws, and Dr. Robert Fender, he said. Yes, I said. Now I started to be afraid. Why would this man, one of the most powerful corporate executives on the planet, bother to find out so much about a pathetic little jailbird like me? Was there a suspicion somewhere that I knew some spectacular secret that could still be revealed about Watergate? Might he be playing cat and mouse with me before having me killed in some way? And Doris Cram, he said. I'm sure you know her too. I was so relieved not to know her. I was innocent after all. His whole case against me would collapse now. He had the wrong man, and I could prove it. I did not know Doris Cram. No, 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 I said. I don't know Doris Cram. The lady you asked me not to retire from the American Harp Company, he said. I never asked you for anything, I said. A slip of the tongue, he said. And then horror grew in me as I realized that I really did know Doris Cram. She was the old secretary who had been sobbing and cleaning out her desk at the Harp showroom. I wasn't about to tell him that I knew her, though. But he knew I knew her anyway. He knew everything. You will be happy to learn that I telephoned her personally and assured her that she did not have to retire after all. She can stay on as long as she likes. Isn't that lovely? No, I said. It was as good an answer as any. But now I was remembering the harp showroom. I felt as though I had been there 1,000 years ago, perhaps in some other life before I was born. Mary Kathleen O'Looney had been there. Arpad Lean, in his omniscience, would surely mention her next. And then the nightmare of the past half hour suddenly revealed itself as having been logical all along. I knew something that Lean himself did not know, that probably nobody in the world but me knew. It was impossible, but it had to be true. Mary Kathleen O'Looney and Mrs. Jack Graham were the same. It was then that Arpad Lean raised my hand to his lips and kissed it. "Forgive me for penetrating your disguise, madam," he said, "but I assume you made it so easy to penetrate on purpose. Your secret is safe with me. I am honored at last to meet you face to face." He kissed my hand again, the same hand Mary Kathleen's dirty little claw had grasped that morning. "High time, madam," he said. "We have worked together so well, so long. High time." My revulsion at being kissed by a man was so fully automatic that I became a veritable Queen Victoria. My rage was imperial, although my language came straight from the playgrounds of my Cleveland adolescence. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" I demanded to know. "I'm no goddamn woman," I said. I have spoken of losing my self-respect over the years. Arpad Lean now lost his in a matter of seconds with this preposterous misapprehension of his. He was speechless and white. When he tried to recover, he did not recover much. He was beyond apologizing, too shattered to exhibit charm or cleverness of any kind. He could only grope for where the truth might lie. "But you know her," he said at last. There was resignation in his voice, for he was acknowledging what was becoming clear to me too, that I was more powerful than he was, if I wanted to be. I confirmed this for him. "I know her well," I said. "She will do whatever I tell her, I'm sure." This last was gratuitous. It was vengeful. He was still a very sick man. I had come between his God and him. It was his turn to hang his head. "Well," he said, and there was a long pause. "Speak well of me if you can." More than anything now, I wanted to rescue Mary Kathleen O'Looney from the ghastly life the dragons in her mind had forced her to lead. I knew where I could find her. "I wonder if you could tell me," I said to the broken Lean, "where I could find a pair of shoes to fit me at this time of night." His voice came to me as though from the place where I was going next, the great cavern under Grand Central Station. "No problem," he said. 23. The next thing I knew, I was all alone, having made certain that no one was following me, was descending the iron staircase into the cavern. Every few steps I called ahead, crooningly, comfortingly. "It's Walter. Mary Kathleen, it's Walter here." How was I shod? I was wearing black patent leather evening slippers with little bows at the insteps. They had been given to me by the 10-year-old son of Arpad Lean, little Dexter. They were just my size. Dexter had been required to buy them for dancing school. He did not need them anymore. He had delivered his first successful ultimatum to his parents. He had told them that he would commit suicide if they insisted that he keep on going to dancing school. He hated dancing school that much. What a dear boy he was. In his pajamas and bathrobe after a swim in the living room. He was so sympathetic and concerned for me, for a little old man who had no shoes for his little feet. I might have been a kindly elf in a fairy tale, and he might have been a princeling, making a gift to the elf of a pair of magic dancing shoes. What a beautiful boy he was. He had big brown eyes. His hair was a crown of black ringlets. I would have given a lot for a son like that. Then again, my own son, Imagine, would have given a lot for a father like Arpad Lean. Fair is fair. "It's Walter. Mary Kathleen," I called again. "It's Walter here." At the bottom of the steps, I came across the first clue that all might not be well. It was a shopping bag from Bloomingdale's, lying on its side, vomiting rags and a doll's head and a copy of Vogue, a RAMJAC publication. I straightened it up and stuffed things back into its mouth, pretending that it was all that needed to be done to put things right again. That is when I saw a spot of blood on the floor. That was something I couldn't put back where it belonged. There were many more further on. And I don't mean to draw out the suspense here to no purpose, to give readers a frisson, to let them suppose that I would find Mary Kathleen with her hands cut off, waving bloody stumps at me. She had in fact been sideswiped by a checker cab on Vanderbilt Avenue and had refused medical attention, saying that she was fine, just fine. But she was far from fine. There was a possible irony here, one I am, however, unable to confirm. There was a very good chance that Mary Kathleen had been creamed by one of her own taxicabs. Her nose was broken, which was where the blood had come from. There were worse things wrong with her. I cannot name them. No inventory was ever taken of everything that was broken in Mary Kathleen. She had hidden herself in a toilet stall. The drops of blood showed me where to look. There could be no doubt as to who was in there. Her basketball shoes were visible beneath the door. At least there was not a corpse in there. When I crooned my name and my harmlessness again, she unlatched the door and pulled it open. She was not using the toilet, but simply sitting on it. She might as well have been using it. Her humiliation by life was now so complete. Her nosebleed had stopped, but it had left her with an Adolf Hitler mustache. "Oh, you poor woman!" I cried. She was unimpressed by her condition. "I guess that's what I am," she said. "That's what my mother was." Her mother, of course, had died of radium poisoning. "What happened to you?" I said. She told me about being hit by a taxi. She had just mailed a letter to Arpad Lean confirming all the orders she had given to him on the telephone. "I'll get an ambulance," I said. "No, no," she said. "Stay here. Stay here." "But you need help," I said. "I'm past that," she said. "You don't even know what's wrong with you," I said. "I'm dying, Walter," she said. "That's enough to know." "Where there's life, there's hope," I said, and I prepared to run upstairs. "Don't you dare leave me alone again," she said. "I'm going to save your life," I said. "You've got to hear what I have to say first," she said. "I've been sitting here thinking, my God, after all I've gone through, after all I've worked for, there isn't going to be anybody to hear the last things I have to say. You get an ambulance, and there won't be anybody who understands English on that thing." "Can I make you more comfortable?" I said. "I am comfortable," she said. There was something to that claim. Her layers and layers of clothing were keeping her warm. Her little head was supported in a corner of the stall and cushioned against the metal by a pillow of rags. There was meanwhile an occasional grumbling in the living rock around us. Something else was dying upstairs, which was the railroad system of the United States. Half-broken locomotives were dragging completely broken passenger cars in and out of the station. "I know your secret," I said. "Which one?" she said. "There are so many now." I expected it to be a moment of high drama when I told her that I knew she was the majority stockholder in RAMJAC. It was a fizzle, of course. She had told me that already, and I had failed to hear. "Are you going deaf, Walter?" she said. "I hear you all right now," I said. "On top of everything else," she said, "am I going to have to yell my last words?" "No," I said, "but I don't want to listen to any more talk about last words. You're so rich, Mary Kathleen. You can take over a whole hospital if you want to, and make them make you well again." "I hate this life," she said. "I've done everything I can to make it better for everybody, but there probably isn't that much that anybody can do. I've had enough of trying. I want to go to sleep now." "But you don't have to live this way," I said. "That's what I came to tell you. I'll protect you, Mary Kathleen. We'll hire people we can trust absolutely. Howard Hughes hired Mormons because they have such high moral standards. We'll hire Mormons too. "Oh, Lord, Walter," she said. "You think I haven't tried Mormons?" "You have?" I said. "I was up to my ears in Mormons one time," she said. And she told me as gruesome a tale as I ever expect to hear. It happened when she was still living expensively, still trying to find ways to enjoy her great wealth at least a little bit. She was a freak that many people would have liked to photograph or capture or torment in some way or kill. People would have liked to kill her for her hands or her money, but also for revenge. RAMJAC had stolen or ruined many other businesses, and even had a hand in the toppling of governments in countries that were small and weak. So she dared not reveal her true identity to anyone but her faithful Mormons, and she had to keep moving all the time. And so it came to pass that she was staying on the top floor of a RAMJAC hotel in Managua, Nicaragua. There were 20 luxury suites on the floor, and she hired them all. The 2 stairways from the floor were blocked with brutal masonry, like the archway in the lobby of the Arapaho. The controls on the elevators were set so that only one could reach the top, and that one was manned by a Mormon. Not even the manager of the hotel supposedly knew who she really was, but everyone in Managua surely must have suspected who she really was. Be that as it may, she rashly resolved to go out into the city alone one day, to taste, however briefly, what she had not tasted for years. What it was like to be just another human being in the world. So out she went in a wig and dark glasses. She befriended a middle-aged American woman who she found weeping on a bench in a park. The woman was from St. Louis. Her husband was a brewmaster in the Anheuser-Busch division of RAMJAC. They had come to Nicaragua for a second honeymoon on the advice of a travel agent. The husband had died that morning of amoebic dysentery. So Mary Kathleen took her back to the hotel and put her into one of the many unused suites she had, and told some of her Mormons to arrange to have the body and the widow flown to St. Louis on a RAMJAC plane. When Mary Kathleen went to tell her about the arrangements, she found the woman strangled with a cord from the draperies. This was the really horrible part, though. Whoever had done it had obviously believed the woman was Mary Kathleen. Her hands were cut off. They were never found. Mary Kathleen went to New York City soon after that. She began to watch shopping bag ladies through field glasses from her suite in the Waldorf Towers. General of the Armies Douglas MacArthur lived on the floor above her, incidentally. She never went out, never had visitors, never called anyone. No hotel people were allowed in. The Mormons brought the food from downstairs and made the beds and did all the cleaning, but one day she received a threatening note anyway. It was in a pink, scented envelope atop her most intimate lingerie. It said that the author knew who she was and held her responsible for the overthrow of the legitimate government of Guatemala. He was going to blow up the hotel. Mary Kathleen could take no more. She walked out on her Mormons, who were surely loyal but unable to protect her. She began to protect herself with layers and layers of clothing she found in garbage cans. "If your money made you so unhappy," I said, "why didn't you give it away?" "I am," she said. "After I die, you look in my left shoe, Walter. You will find my will in there. I leave the RAMJAC Corporation to its rightful owners, the American people." She smiled. It was harrowing to see such cosmic happiness expressed by gums and a rotten tooth or two. I thought she had died. She had not. "Mary Kathleen?" I said. "I'm not dead yet," she said. "I really am going to get help now," I said. "If you do, I'll die," she said. "I can promise that now. I can die when I want to now. I can pick the time." "Nobody can do that," I said. "Shopping bag ladies can," she said. "It's our special dispensation. We can't say when we will start dying, but once we do, Walter, we can pick the exact time. Would you like me to die right now at the count of 10? "Not now, not ever," I said. "Then stay here," she said. So I did. What else could I do? "I want to thank you for hugging me," she said. "Any time," I said. "Once a day is enough," she said. "I've had my hug today." "You were the first woman I ever really made love to," I said. "Do you remember that?" "I remember the hugs," she said. "I remember you said you loved me. No man had ever said that to me before. My mother used to say it to me a lot, before she died." I was starting to cry again. "I know you never meant it," she said. I did, I protested. "Oh my God, I did." "It's all right," she said. "You couldn't help it that you were born without a heart. At least you tried to believe what the people with hearts believed. So you were a good man just the same." She stopped breathing. She stopped blinking. She was dead. Epilogue. There was more. There is always more. It was 9 o'clock in the evening of my first full day of freedom. I still had 3 hours to go. I went upstairs and told a policeman that there was a dead shopping bag lady in the basement. His duties had made him cynical. He said to me, "So what else is new?" So I stood by the body of my old friend in the basement until the ambulance attendants came, just as any other faithful animal would have done. It took a while, since it was known that she was dead. She was stiffening up when they got there. They commented on that. I had to ask them what they had just said, since they did not speak in English. It turned out that their first language was Urdu. They were both from Pakistan. Their English was primitive. If Mary Kathleen had died in their presence instead of mine, they would have said, I am sure, that she spoke gibberish at the end. I inquired of them in order to calm the sobs that were welling up inside me, to tell me a little bit about Urdu. They said it had a literature as great as any in the world, but that it had begun as a spare and ugly artificial language invented in the court of Genghis Khan. Its purpose in the beginning was military. It allowed his captains to give orders that were understood in every part of the Mongol Empire. Poets would later make it beautiful. Live and learn. I gave the police Mary Kathleen's maiden name. I gave them my true name as well. I was not about to be cute with the police. Neither was I ready to have anyone learn yet that Mrs. Jack Graham was dead. The consequences of that announcement would surely be an avalanche of some kind. I was the only person on the planet who could set it off. I was not ready to set it off yet. This was not cunning on my part, as some people have said. It was my natural awe of an avalanche. I walked home, a harmless little elf in his magic dancing shoes, to the Hotel Arapaho. Much straw had been spun into gold that day, and much gold had been spun into straw, and the spinning had just begun. There was a new night clerk, naturally, since Israel Edel had been summoned to Arpad Lean's. This new man had been sent over to fill in on short notice. His regular post was behind the desk at the Carlisle, also a RAMJAC hotel. He was exquisitely dressed and groomed. He was mortified having to deal with whores and people fresh out of jails and lunatic asylums and so on. He had to tell me that he really belonged to the Carlisle and that he was only filling in. This was not the real him. When I told him my name, he said that there was a package for me, and a message too. The police had returned my shoes and had picked up the clarinet parts from my bureau. The message was from Arpad Lean. It was a holograph, like Mary Kathleen's will, which I had in the inner pocket of my suitcase, along with my Doctor of Mixology degree. The pockets of my raincoat were stuffed with other materials from Mary Kathleen's shoes. They bulged like saddlebags. Lean wrote that the letter was for my eyes only. He said that in the midst of the confusion at his penthouse, he had never gotten around to offering a specific job to me. He suggested that I would be happy in his old division, which was Down Home Records. It now included the New York Times and Universal Pictures, and Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey, and Dell Publishing, among other things. There was also a cat food company, he said, which I needn't worry about. It was about to be transferred to the General Foods Division. It had belonged to the Times. If this is not your cup of tea, he wrote, we'll find something that is. I am absolutely thrilled to know that we will have an observer for Mrs. Graham among us. Please give her my warmest regards. There was a postscript. He said that he had taken the liberty of making an appointment for me at 11 the next morning with someone named Morty Sills. There was an address. I assumed that Sills was a RAMJAC personnel director or something. It turned out that he was a tailor. Once again, a multimillionaire was sending Walter F. Starbuck to his own tailor to be made into a convincing counterfeit of a perfect gentleman. On the following morning, I was still numbed by my dread of the avalanche. I was $4,000 richer and technically a thief. Mary Kathleen had had 4 $1,000 bills as insoles for her basketball shoes. There was nothing in the papers about the death of Mary Kathleen. Why would there have been? Who cared? There was an obituary for the patient Sarah Clues had lost, the woman with the bad heart. She left 3 children behind. Her husband had died in an automobile accident a month before, so the children were orphans now. As I was being measured for a suit by Morty Sills, I found it unbearable to think of Mary Kathleen's not being claimed by anyone. Clyde Carter was there too, fresh off the plane from Atlanta. He too was getting a brand new wardrobe, even before Arpad Lean had seen him. He was scared. I told him not to be. So I went to the morgue after lunch, and I claimed her. It was easily done. Who else would want that tiny body? It had no relatives. I was its only friend. I had one last look at it. It was nothing. There was nobody there anymore. Nobody home. I found a mortician only 1 block away. I had him pick up the body and embalm it and put it into a serviceable casket. There was no funeral. I did not even accompany it to the grave, which was a crypt in a great concrete honeycomb in Morristown, New Jersey. The cemetery had advertised in the Times that morning. Each crypt had a tasteful little bronze door on which the tenant's name was engraved. Little did I dream that the man who did the engraving of the doors would be arrested for drunken driving about 2 years later, and would comment on what an unusual name the arresting officer had. He had come across it only once before, at his lugubrious place of work. The name of the officer, a Morris County deputy sheriff actually, was Francis X. O'Looney. O'Looney would become curious as to how the woman in the crypt was related to him. O'Looney, using the sparse documents at the cemetery, would trace Mary Kathleen back to the morgue in New York City. There he would get a set of her fingerprints. On the outside chance that she had been arrested or had spent time in a mental institution, he would send the prints to the FBI. Thus would RAMJAC be brought tumbling down. There was a bizarre sidelight to the case. O'Looney, before he found out who Mary Kathleen was, fell in love with his dream of her when she was young. He had it all wrong, incidentally. He dreamed that she was tall and buxom and black-haired, whereas she had been short and scrawny and red-haired. He dreamed that she was an immigrant who had gone to work for an eccentric millionaire in a spooky mansion, and that she had been both attracted and repelled by this man, and that he had abused her to the point of death. All this came out in divorce proceedings brought against O'Looney by his wife of 32 years. It was front-page stuff in the tabloids for a week or more. O'Looney was already famous by then. The papers called him the man who blew the whistle on RAMJAC, or variations on that theme. Now his wife was claiming that his affections had been alienated by a ghost. He wouldn't sleep with her anymore. He stopped brushing his teeth. He was chronically late to work. He became a grandfather, and he didn't care. He wouldn't even look at the baby. What was particularly sick about this behavior was that even after he found out what Mary Kathleen had really been like, he stayed in love with the original dream. "Nobody can ever take that away from me," he said. "It's the most precious thing I own." He has been relieved of his duties, I hear. His wife is suing him again, this time for her share in the small fortune he got for the movie rights to his dream. The film is to be shot in a spooky old mansion in Morristown. If you can believe the gossip columns, there is to be a talent search for an actress to play the Irish immigrant girl. Al Pacino has already agreed to play Sheriff O'Looney, and Kevin McCarthy to play the eccentric millionaire. So I dallied too long, and now I must go to prison again, they say. My hijinks with Mary Kathleen's remains were not crimes in and of themselves, since corpses have no more rights than do orts from last night's midnight snack. My actions were accessory, however, to the commission of a Class E felony, which, according to Section 190.30 of the Penal Law of the State of New York, consists of unlawfully concealing a will. I had entombed the will itself in a safe deposit box of Manufacturers Hanover Trust Company, a division of RAMJAC. I have tried to explain to my little dog that her master must go away for a while, because he violated Section 190.30. I have told her that laws are written to be obeyed. She understands nothing. She loves my voice. All news from me is good news. She wags her tail. I lived very high. I bought a duplex with a low-interest company loan. I cashed stock options for clothes and furniture. I became a fixture at the Metropolitan Opera and the New York City Ballet, coming and going by limousine. I gave intimate parties at my home for RAMJAC authors and recording artists and movie actors and circus performers. Isaac Bashevis Singer, Mick Jagger, Jane Fonda, Gunther Gable Williams, and the like. It was fun. After RAMJAC acquired the Marlborough Gallery and Associated American Artists, I had painters and sculptors to my parties too. How well did I do at RAMJAC? According to my incumbency, my division, including subsidiaries under its control, both covert and overt, won 11 platinum records, 42 gold records, 22 Oscars, 11 National Book Awards, 2 American League pennants, 2 National League pennants, 2 World Series, and 53 Grammys. And we never failed to show a return on capital of less than 23%. I even engaged in corporate infighting, preventing the transfer of the cat food company from my division to General Foods. It was exciting. I got really mad. We just missed getting another Nobel Prize in Literature several times, but then we already had 2, Saul Bellow and Mr. Singer. I myself have made Who's Who for the first time in my life. This is a slightly tarnished triumph, admittedly, since my own division controls Gulf and Western, which controls Who's Who. I put it all in there, except for the prison term and the name of my son, where I was born, where I went to college, various jobs I've held, my wife's maiden name. Did I invite my own son to my parties, to chat with so many heroes and heroines of his? No. Did he quit the Times when I became his superior there? No. Did he write or telephone greetings of any sort? No. Did I try to get in touch with him? Only once. I was in the basement apartment of Leland and Sarah Clues. I had been drinking, something I don't enjoy and rarely do, and I was physically so close to my son. His apartment was only 30 feet above my head. It was Sarah who made me telephone him. So I dialed my son's number. It was about 8 o'clock at night. One of my little grandchildren answered, and I asked his name. Juan, he said. And your last name? I said. Stankiewicz, he said. In accordance with my wife's will, incidentally, Juan and his brother Geraldo were receiving reparations from West Germany for the confiscation of my wife's father's bookstore in Vienna by the Nazis after the Anschluss, Germany's annexation of Austria, in 1938. My wife's will was an old one, written when Walter was a little boy. The lawyer had advised her to leave the money to her grandchildren so as to avoid one generation of taxes. She was trying to be smart about money. I was out of work at the time. Is your daddy home? I said. He's at the movies, he said. I was so relieved. I did not leave my name. I said I would call back later. As for what Arpad Lean suspected about me, like anyone else, he was free to suspect as much or as little as he pleased. There were no more fingerprinted messages from Mrs. Graham. The last one confirmed in writing that Clues and I and Ubriaco and Edel and Laws and Carter and Fender were to be made vice presidents. There was a deathly silence after that. But there had been deathly silences before. One lasted 2 years. Lean, meanwhile, operated under the mandate of a letter Mary Kathleen had sent him in 1971, which said only this: acquire, acquire, acquire. She had certainly picked the right man for the job. Arpad Lean was born to acquire and acquire and acquire. What was the biggest lie I told him? That I saw Mrs. Graham once a week, and that she was happy and well and quite satisfied with the way things were going. As I testified before a grand jury, he gave every evidence of believing me, no matter what I said about Mrs. Graham. I was in an extraordinary position theologically with respect to that man. I knew the answers to so many of the ultimate questions he might want to ask about that life of his. Why did he have to go on acquiring and acquiring and acquiring? Because his deity wanted to give the wealth of the United States to the people of the United States. Where was his deity? In Morristown, New Jersey. Was she pleased with how he was doing his job? She was neither pleased nor displeased, since she was dead as a doornail. What should he do next? Find another deity to serve. I was in an extraordinary position theologically with respect to his millions of employees too, of course, since he was a deity to them, and supposedly knew exactly what he wanted and why. Well, it is all being sold off now by the federal government, which has hired 20,000 new bureaucrats, half of them lawyers, to oversee the job. Many people assumed that RAMJAC owned everything in the country. It was something of an anticlimax then to discover that it owned only 19% of it, not even 1/5. Still, RAMJAC was enormous when compared with other conglomerates. The second largest conglomerate in the free world was only half its size. The next 5 after that, if combined, would have been only about 2/3 the size of RAMJAC. There are plenty of dollars, it turns out, to buy all the goodies the federal government has to sell. The President of the United States himself was astonished by how many dollars had been scattered over the world through the years. It was as though he had told everybody on the planet, "Please rake your yard and send the leaves to me." There was a photograph on an inside page of the Daily News yesterday of a dock in Brooklyn. There was about an acre of bales that looked like cotton on the dock. These were actually bales of American currency from Saudi Arabia, cash on the barrelhead, so to speak, for the McDonald's hamburgers division of RAMJAC. The headline said this: "Home at last." Who is the lucky owner of all those bales? The people of the United States, according to the will of Mary Kathleen O'Looney. What, in my opinion, was wrong with Mary Kathleen's scheme for a peaceful economic revolution? For one thing, the federal government was wholly unprepared to operate all the business of RAMJAC on behalf of the people. For another thing, most of those businesses, rigged only to make profits, were as indifferent to the needs of the people as, say, thunderstorms. Mary Kathleen might as well have left 1/5 of the weather to the people. The businesses of RAMJAC, by their very nature, were as unaffected by the joys and tragedies of human beings as the rain that fell on the night that Medeiros and Sacco and Vanzetti died in an electric chair. It would have rained anyway. The economy is a thoughtless weather system, and nothing more. Some joke on the people to give them such a thing. There was a supper party given in my honor last week, a going-away party, you might say. It celebrated the completion of my last full day at the office. The host and hostess were Leland Clues and his lovely wife Sarah. They have not moved out of their basement apartment in Tudor City, nor has Sarah given up private nursing, although Leland is now pulling down about $100,000 a year at RAMJAC. Much of their money goes to the foster parents program, a scheme that allows them to support individual children in unfortunate circumstances in many parts of the world. They are supporting 50 children, I think they said. They have letters and photographs from several of them, which they passed around. I am something of a hero to certain people, which is a novelty. I single-handedly extended the life of RAMJAC by 2 years and a little more. If I had not concealed the will of Mary Kathleen, those at the party would never have become vice presidents of RAMJAC. I myself would have been thrown out on my ear, to become what I expect to be anyway, if I survive my new prison term, which is a shopping bag man. Am I broke again? Yes. My defense has been expensive. Also, my Watergate lawyers have caught up with me. I still owe them a lot for all they did for me. Clyde Carter, my former guard in Georgia and now a vice president of the Chrysler Air Temp Division of RAMJAC, was there with his lovely wife Claudia. He did a side-splitting imitation of his cousin the president, saying, "I will never lie to you," and promising to rebuild the South Bronx and so on. Frank Ubriaco was there with his lovely new wife, Marilyn, who is only 17. Frank is 53. They met at a discotheque. They seem very happy. She said that what attracted her to him at first was that he wore a white glove on only one hand. She had to find out why. He told her at first that the hand had been burned by a Chinese communist flamethrower during the Korean War, but later admitted that he had done it to himself with a friolator. They have started a collection of tropical fish. They have a coffee table that contains tropical fish. Frank invented a new sort of cash register for the McDonald's hamburgers division. It was getting harder all the time to find employees who understood numbers well, so Frank took the numbers off the keys of the cash register and substituted pictures of hamburgers and milkshakes and French fries and Coca-Colas and so on. The person toting up a bill would simply punch the pictures of the various things a customer had ordered, and the cash register would add it up for him. Frank got a big bonus for that. My guess is that the Saudis will keep him on. There was a telegram to me from Dr. Robert Fender, still in prison in Georgia. Mary Kathleen had wanted RAMJAC to make him a vice president too, but there was no way to get him out of prison. Treason was just too serious a crime. Clyde Carter had written to him that I was going back to prison myself, and that there was going to be a party for me, and that he should send a telegram. This was all it said. Ting-a-ling. Ting-a-ling. That was from his science fiction story about the judge from the planet Vicuna, of course, who had to find a new body to occupy, and who flew into my ear down there in Georgia and found himself stuck to my feelings and destiny until I died. According to the judge in that story, that was how they said both hello and goodbye on Vicuna. Ting-a-ling. Ting-a-ling was like the Hawaiian aloha, which also means both hello and goodbye. Hello and goodbye. What else is there to say? Our language is much larger than it needs to be. I asked Clyde if he knew what Fender was working on now. A science fiction novel about economics, said Clyde. Did he say what pseudonym he's going to use? I said. Kilgore Trout, said Clyde. My devoted secretary, Leora Borders, and her husband Lance were there. Lance was just getting over a radical mastectomy. He told me that 1 mastectomy in 200 was performed on a man. Live and learn. There were several other RAMJAC friends who should have been there, but dared not come. They feared that their reputations, and hence their futures as executives, might be tainted if it were known that they were friendly with me. There were telegrams from other people I had had to my famous little parties. John Kenneth Galbraith and Salvador Dali and Erica Jong and Liv Ullman and the Flying Farfans and on and on. Robert Redford's telegram, I remember, said this: hang tough. The telegrams were something less than spontaneous. As Sarah Clues would admit under questioning, she had been soliciting them all week long. Arpad Lean sent a spoken message through Sarah, which was meant for my ears alone. Good show. That could be taken a million different ways. He was no longer presiding over the dismemberment of RAMJAC, incidentally. He had been hired away by American Telephone and Telegraph Company, which had just been bought by a new company in Monaco called Bybeck. Nobody was able to find out who or what Bybeck is so far. Some people think it's the Russians. At least I will have some real friends outside of prison this time. There was a bowl of yellow tulips on the table for a centerpiece. It was April again. It was raining outside. Nature sympathized. I was seated at the place of honor, to the right of my hostess, of Sarah Clues, the nurse. Of the 4 women I ever loved, she was always the easiest one to talk to. That may be because I had never promised her anything, and so had never let her down. Oh, Lord! The things I used to promise my mother and my poor wife, and poor Mary Kathleen. Young Israel Edel and his not-so-lovely wife Norma were there. I say that she was not so lovely for the simple reason that she has always hated me. I don't know why. I have never insulted her, and she is certainly as pleased as Punch with the upturn her husband's career has taken. He would still be a night clerk if it weren't for me. The Edels are renovating a brownstone in Brooklyn Heights with all the money he makes. Still, every time she looks at me, I feel like something the cat dragged in. It is just one of those crazy things. I think she may be slightly crazy. She miscarried twins about a year ago. That might have something to do with it. She may have some sort of chemical imbalance as a result of that. Who knows? She wasn't seated next to me anyway, thank God. Another black woman was. That was Eucharist Laws, the lovely wife of Cleveland Laws, the former RAMJAC chauffeur. He is a vice president of the Transico division now. That is really his wife's name, Eucharist. It means happy gratitude. And I don't know why more people don't name their daughters that. Everybody calls her Yuki. Yuki was homesick for the South. She said the people were friendlier and more relaxed and more natural down there. She was after Cleveland to retire in or near Atlanta, especially now that the Transico division had been bought by Playgrounds International, which everybody knows is a front for the mafia. It just can't be proved. My own division was being snapped up by IG Farben, a West German concern. It won't be the same old RAMJAC, I said to Yuki, that's for sure. There were presents, some silly, some not. Israel Edel gave me a rubber ice cream cone with a squeaker in it, a plaything for my little dog, who is a female Lhasa Apso, a golden dust mop without a handle. I could never have a dog when I was young, because Alexander Hamilton McCone hated dogs. So this is the only dog I have ever known at all well. And she sleeps with me. She snores. So did my wife. I have never bred her, but now, according to the veterinarian, Dr. Howard Padwee, she is experiencing a false pregnancy and believes the rubber ice cream cone to be a puppy. She hides it in closets. She carries it up and down the stairs of my duplex. She is even secreting milk for it. She is getting shots to make her stop doing that. I observe how profoundly serious nature has made her about a rubber ice cream cone. Brown rubber cone, pink rubber ice cream. I have to wonder what equally ridiculous commitments to bits of trash I myself have made. Not that it matters at all. We are here for no purpose unless we can invent one. Of that I am sure. The human condition in an exploding universe would not have been altered one iota if, rather than live as I have, I had done nothing but carry a rubber ice cream cone from closet to closet for 60 years. Clyde Carter and Cleveland Clues chipped in on a far more expensive present, which is a chess-playing computer. It is about the size of a cigar box, but most of the space is taken up by a compartment for the playing pieces. The computer itself is not much bigger than a package of cigarettes. It is called Boris. Boris has a long, narrow little window in which he announces his moves. He can even joke about the moves I make. Really, he will say, or have you played this game before? Or is this a trap? Or spot me a queen. Those are standard chess jokes. Alexander Hamilton McCone and I exchanged those same tired jokes endlessly when, for the sake of a Harvard education in my future, I agreed to be his chess-playing machine. If Boris had existed in those days, I probably would have gone to Western Reserve and then become a tax assessor or an office manager in a lumber yard, or an insurance salesman or some such thing. Instead, I am the most disreputable Harvard graduate since Putzi Hanfstaengl, who was Hitler's favorite pianist. At least I gave $10,000 to Harvard before the lawyers came and took away all my money again. It was time for me now at the party to respond to all the toasts that had been offered to me, I stood. I had not had a drop of alcohol. I am a recidivist, I said. I defined the word as describing a person who habitually relapsed into crime or antisocial behavior. A good word to know, said Leland Clues. There was laughter all around. Our lovely hostess has promised 2 more surprises before the evening is over, I said. These would turn out to be the trooping in of my son and his little human family from upstairs, and the playing of a phonograph recording of part of my testimony before Congressman Richard M. Nixon of California and others from so long ago. It had to be played at 78 revolutions per minute. Imagine that. As though I hadn't had surprises enough, I said. Not enough nice ones, old man, said Cleveland Laws. Say it in Chinese, I said. He had, of course, been a prisoner of war of the Chinese for a while. Laws said something that certainly sounded like Chinese. How do we know he wasn't ordering sweet and sour pork, said Sarah. You don't, said Laws. We had begun our feast with oysters, so I announced that oysters were not the aphrodisiacs many people imagined them to be. There were booze, and then Sarah Clues beat me to the punchline of that particular joke. Walter ate 12 of them the other night, she said, and only 4 of them worked. She had lost another patient the day before. There was more laughter all around. And I was suddenly offended and depressed by how silly we were. The news, after all, could hardly have been worse. Foreigners and criminals and other endlessly greedy conglomerates were gobbling up RAMJAC. Mary Kathleen's legacy to the people was being converted to mountains of rapidly deteriorating currency, which were being squandered in turn on a huge new bureaucracy, and on legal fees and consultants' fees and on and on. What was left, it was said by politicians, would help to pay the interest on the people's national debt, and would buy them more of the highways and public buildings and advanced weaponry they so richly deserved. Also, I was about to go to jail again. So I elected to complain about our levity. You know what is finally going to kill this planet, I said. Cholesterol, said Frank Ubriaco. A total lack of seriousness, I said. Nobody gives a damn anymore about what's really going on, what's going to happen next, or how we ever got into such a mess in the first place. Israel Edel, with his doctor's degree in history, took this to be a suggestion that we become even sillier, if possible. So he began to make booping and beeping sounds. Others chimed in with their own beeps and boops. They were all imitating supposedly intelligent signals from outer space, which had been received by radio telescopes only the week before. They were the latest news sensation, and had in fact driven the RAMJAC story off the front pages. People were beeping and booping and laughing, not just at my party, but everywhere. Nobody was prepared to guess what the signals meant. Scientists did say, though, that if the signals were coming from whence they appeared to come, they had to be 1,000,000 years old or more. If Earth were to make a reply, it would be the start of a very slow conversation indeed. So I gave up on saying anything serious. I told another joke, and I sat down. The party ended, as I say, with the arrival of my son and daughter-in-law and their 2 children, and with the playing of a phonograph recording of the closing minutes of my testimony before a congressional committee in 1949. My daughter-in-law and my grandchildren found it natural and easy, seemingly, to accord me the honors due to a grandfather who, when all was said and done, was a clean and dapper and kindly old man. The model for what children found to love in me, I suppose, was Santa Claus. My son was a shock. He was such a homely and unhealthy and unhappy-looking young man. He was short like me, and nearly as fat as his poor mother had become toward the end. I still had most of my hair, but he was bald. The baldness must have been inherited from the Jewish side of his family. He was a chain smoker of unfiltered cigarettes. He coughed a lot. His suit was riddled with cigarette holes. I glanced at him while the record was playing, and I saw that he was so nervous that he had 3 cigarettes going at one time. He had shaken my hand with the correct wretchedness of a German general surrendering at Stalingrad, say. I was still a monster to him. He had been cajoled into coming against his better judgment by his wife and Sarah Clues. Too bad. The record changed nothing. The children, kept up long after their bedtime, squirmed and dozed. The record was meant to honor me, to let people who might not know about it hear for themselves what an idealistic young man I had been. The part in which I accidentally betrayed Leland Clues as a former communist was on another record, I presume. It was not played. Only my very last sentences were of much interest to me. I had forgotten them. Congressman Nixon had asked me why, as the son of immigrants who had been treated so well by Americans, as a man who had been treated like a son and been sent to Harvard by an American capitalist, I had been so ungrateful to the American economic system. The answer I gave him was not original. Nothing about me has ever been original. I repeated what my one-time hero, Kenneth Whistler, had said in reply to the same general sort of question long, long ago. Whistler had become a witness at a trial of strikers accused of violence. The judge had become curious about him, had asked him why such a well-educated man from such a good family would immerse himself in the working class. My stolen answer to Nixon was this: "Why? The Sermon on the Mount, sir." There was polite applause when the people at the party realized that the phonograph record had ended. Goodbye. W.F.S.